Main thing that I'm getting, certainly from contacts within the Russian security apparatus, is obviously a deep sense of shame about the fact that this was allowed to happen, but also, frankly, even amongst them, an exasperation with Putin trying to claim that it's something that it isn't. In other words, that this is an attack from Ukraine.
Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin says all 4 gunmen accused of attacking a concert venue in Moscow have been arrested. At least 133 people were killed and more than 140 injured. In the Sunday Times today, Professor Mark Galeotti looks at what the attack means for Russia and how President Putin will respond. He is honorary professor at University College London. He's an author of many books on Russia, including Putin's War. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
First of all, I mean, many of us obviously horrified by the attack in Moscow on Friday. When you looked at it from your expertise, what's your assessment of what happened and indeed why it happened?
Well, why it happened, to deal with that first, I mean, ISIS-K, which clearly are responsible regardless of Putin's fulminations about Ukraine, have long actually regarded Russia as being pretty much an equal target to the United States. And because there are many Central Asians who have been radicalized, who are in Russia, actually it's there that they've carried out most of their attacks, including a terrible bombing on the St. Petersburg metro some years back. So as far as they're concerned, Russia is always a legitimate target. How it was carried out? I mean, frankly, it's a sign of this is what happens when full assault weapons are available, and they are very widely available on the Russian black market. And you manage to get a few people together who are willing to actually go out and kill. This is the sad truth. At some point, terrorist attacks will always get through whatever security is available.
What are your sources in Russia telling you about kind of what we know about what happened and indeed the security response from the Russians?
I mean, in terms of the initial security response, I mean, a lot has been said about how long it took the police to get there and so forth. In practice, it actually wasn't that far off the usual kind of response rate. I mean, it took about 40 minutes for the sort of, fully armed security forces to turn up, by which time the terrorists had already left. Now, again, that's not really surprising given the confusion of the moment. The striking thing is actually how quickly the terrorists were caught. And there's some room for suspicion there. But again, I think we have to realize Russia is a security state. And once it gets its act together, it is able to mobilize a lot of resources. Main thing that I'm getting, certainly from contacts within the Russian security apparatus, is obviously a deep sense of shame about the fact that this was allowed to happen. But also, frankly, even amongst them, an exasperation with Putin trying to claim that it's something that it isn't. In other words, that this is an attack from Ukraine rather than an ISIS terrorist incident.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because there have been obviously these suggestions from Putin that there are links to Ukraine, saying that they were trying to escape over the Ukrainian border. But yet it appears that security officials within Russia are very much pointing the finger at ISIS-K.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that even, if one looks at the Russian tabloid press this morning, there's a lot about how, evil Ukraine is responsible. But on the other hand, if you look at Российская газета, which is a rather sort of stodgy government newspaper of record, Ukraine scarcely appears at all. I mean, I think it is clear that actually whatever Putin may be saying for public consumption, the Russian state's working assumption is absolutely that this is ISIS-K.
Does this weaken Putin?
It does. Look, back in the day, in some ways, he had two main forms of legitimation. One was that he was the great provider, that under him, Russian quality of life steadily improved, but the other one, that he was the strong defender of the motherland. Now, look, for most Russians, actually, quality of life is increasingly under pressure. That social contract has been broken. So all he's really got left is the tough guy who will keep you safe. And, the tough guy has clearly not kept, a large number of Russians safe. There's a lot of dismay. And, it's manifesting itself in social media and in all kinds of other ways. And as far as they're concerned, this is all part of a general sense that Putin is no longer who he was, no longer quite so sort of stern and reliable in protecting them all.
And so what does that mean for him? I mean, he's just won his election, and won in inverted commas because he made sure he did. But in reality, what does that dissatisfaction amongst Russian people and some comments on social media, what does that translate into for Putin?
I think it's part to the sort of the slow erosion of Putin's legitimacy. And yes, in and of itself, it doesn't immediately change things overnight. But on the other hand, along with this farcical election, which again he chose to rig almost to an embarrassing degree as a challenge to the Russian people, it means that bit by bit he's losing his capacity to basically be able to command the loyalty and the affection of the Russian people. Now, at present, that doesn't mean anything. But the point is there will be crises up ahead. And one of the ways in which in the past Putin has dealt with crises has been his capacity to be able to call on that legitimacy. If that's not there, then all he's got left really is muscle and his control of the security apparatus. So he becomes more and more dependent on violence and fear.
So what do you think? I mean, are we likely to see a crackdown? What do we think Putin's response to this will be? I mean, we've seen some in Ukraine overnight, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, look, again, Putin has to act just simply, if nothing else, because he needs to show that he's being tough. So unfortunately, we will probably see a crackdown on Central Asian guest workers, of whom there are millions across the Russian Federation. And the trouble is that, okay, so this is a way of performatively looking tough. The point is the Russian economy desperately needs these workers at a time when there's a labor crisis in Russia. So actually, the stake is in a bind. Politically, it needs to seem tough. Economically, it needs to keep these workers in country. Probably Putin is going to sacrifice the economic advantage just in order to maintain his credentials as a tough guy.
I just want to talk to you a little bit about the warnings that we were told the United States passed on to Russia a couple of weeks ago, saying that there was a significant terrorist threat and actually warning US citizens not to go to crowded events. I think they even mentioned the possibility of a concert. That was, we understand, passed on to the Russians.
It was, and unfortunately, Russia, Putin chose to actually sort of downplay it. He presented it, maybe even believed it was actually an American attempt to try and basically sow some dissatisfaction and concern ahead of the elections. We've got to note that this was a warning that was put out on the 7th of this month, and it just simply said for the next 48 hours. So, I mean, it clearly wasn't as specific as to say this concert or, even just simply anything like the actual date. So I think it's a sort of a classic mix. On the one hand, the warning was probably not as specific as, some Americans are claiming. But on the other hand, catastrophically, Putin chose to actually ignore it rather than take it seriously.
Mark Galeotti, thank you so much for speaking to us this morning. He is a honorary professor at University College London, author of many books on Russia, including Putin's war. He's also written a brilliant piece in the Sunday Times today, guiding you through essentially all of the different elements of this story. So if you've got a digital subscription to the Times, the Sunday Times, you can go online now, go to the website, go to the app. What Mark Galeotti does brilliantly is he talks about, as he said there, those Russian contacts, those people within the security services. So he gets a real sense of what's going on, because one of the massive challenges, of course, with Russia is there is not a free press. Many journalists aren't able to operate within Russia, so it's quite difficult to access that kind of information. But Mark Galeotti does it brilliantly for us.